Hi, everyone coming onto the call. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Challenge of Evil webinar with Bastiaan Baan. I feel so lucky to be here with you, Bastiaan, and everyone will be able to see you in just a minute. Maybe you can say hello and they should be able to see you.
Hello, everyone. Here I am back again, 70 plus. 2 weeks ago, I became 70. That's it.
Congratulations. That's beautiful. So I just wanted to welcome everyone on and find out where people are tuning in from. And for this, we're going to use the chat, not the Q&A. We have a little computer thing that when I use this computer, we can't really see the Q&A, but we can see the chat. So if you wanted to type in, that's great. Thank you. I see people doing that. Where you're joining us from, that's wonderful. And then I'll introduce Bastiaan. So let me see where... let me look and see where everybody's coming in from. That's super. Hi from New Hampshire and Denver and Santa Barbara and Alabama and Massachusetts. Thank you so much. And Florida, Tennessee, Oregon, the Netherlands. Wow, you're not alone. Montreal, New York, San Rafael. That's great. Scotland, lovely. North Carolina, Vermont. Everybody's getting into it. And just so you know, when you type in the chat, everyone can see what you're typing, just so you're aware. So everybody's getting to see this, which is lovely. Fair Oaks, California, thank you so much. And don't be too shy. I know people felt a little shy before to share where they're calling in from or share questions, but please do that. It really enriches the webinar. And I wanted to let you know all the questions we received after the webinar that were sent on to Bastiaan. Thank you so much for working with those. They were really wonderful questions, so thank you. Okay, just a few more. Connecticut, New Hope, Pennsylvania, that's my old hood right around there. Wisconsin, Calgary, Canada, love our Canadian friends. Okay, so I want to give Bastiaan as much time as possible, so we're going to get started. And I just feel so privileged and lucky to be doing this webinar with you, and so glad that you agreed to do it with us. We have so many people registered, well over 200 people really interested in this topic. And I wanted to tell people a little bit that you have about 6 or 7 books that people can access to through Florist Books. And you said the one that you're working on right now that will come out is called Ways to Western Meditation. And I'm really looking forward to reading that and checking it out when it comes out. And your most recent book was called Sources of Ritual. So thank you so much, Bastiaan. I'm just going to turn it over to you so you can get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for the introduction. As expected, there was a whole range of questions last time. After and during the webinar, well, a series of them came 1, 2, 3, 4 days after. They were so different that it will be difficult to put them in the context of this second session. So what I did, most of the questions, I answered them personally, but one or the other you will recognize, those who asked the question, in this second webinar, where we go from the theme, how to know evil, to the next step, how to confront evil. We ended after the session with a question that in fact built the bridge between the first and the second theme. It said something like, often people are, or have the feeling that they are kind of overtaken by evil, that they are not ready for it. And the question was, is there, in your experience of understanding evil, are there ways in which you are helped by knowledge and insight? Are there weapons, so to say, or tools with which you can work in the confrontation with evil? A part of this answer, although I realize that each individual will have his own answer, a part of this answer came in an interesting question that was put at the end of the first session. Some of you saw it appear on the screen. There was too little time to answer it, so I'll go a little bit into the answer, although I answered the person who put the question, Christina, also individually. She asked, Rudolf Steiner mentions one could say, the hidden presence of the divine being in this sculpture, representative of the human being. This divine being is called Isis Sophia. How can she be in the conversation with evil? How can she be in, so to say, in the background of this image of the different forms of evil and the one in the middle? Now, this question is a theme in itself. It could be a lecture in itself. So I have to refer to a lecture cycle that Rudolf Steiner gave with the title, The Search for the New Isis, the Divine Sophia, November 26 to December 26, 1920. And there in one of the lectures, the lecture of December 24, 1920, you will find the interesting remark of Rudolf Steiner. Since his resurrection, Christ is always present. However, the understanding of Christ, the knowledge of Christ, the wisdom of Christ is often lacking. So he uses the word Sophia, wisdom, in relation to the Christ. And it shows that in order to work with evil or to confront evil, you need not only to know evil, as the title of the first session said, but you need to develop a form of wisdom. Let me put the answer in a simple and nice form that was once given by a Jewish rabbi who asked, tell me, what is the difference between a tzaddik and a sinner? You know what a tzaddik is? Tzaddik is the Jewish name for a wise man. So what is the difference between a wise man and a sinner? And the answer is then, the tzaddik, the wise man, knows that he sins as long as he lives. The sinner knows that he lives as long as he sins. So you need some wisdom in order to work with the challenge of evil. That's, so to say, the story that is behind it. And even more than knowledge is needed, wisdom, which, back to the lecture cycle of Rudolf Steiner, which is more than a human faculty, wisdom. Rudolf Steiner points out in these lectures about the new Isis that wisdom in its origin, in its full reality, is a divine being. This divine being is needed in the confrontation with evil. And today in our webinar, we will focus on this essential wisdom of evil. For those who think that the answer of the rabbi is just Old Testament stuff, let me give you the 20th century version that Rudolf Steiner gave of the necessary of wisdom and the one could say, the necessity of evil. Last time we also spoke about necessary evil. So Rudolf Steiner once said, in our epoch, and he speaks about the time of the so-called consciousness soul, one could say the time where we become conscious of ourselves. In our epoch, the human being has to take in the tendencies of evil. There is no crime in the world to which each human being has a tendency in his subconscious life. I have to put it in a positive way. Each human being has the tendency in his subconscious life to commit crimes. What an incredible statement. Nobody is excluded from evil. Also those nice people who always are helpful and so on, in our subconscious life, the part where we are not aware, evil is constantly trying to find its way. We are all in the same boat, at least in our subconscious life. And of course, the question is, how can we how can we wake up for what is in our subconscious life? I hope we find the time today to talk about the confrontation with this part in ourself, the so-called double, the doppelganger. Are we awake for our shadow sides? So this insight that Rudolf Steiner gives is, one could say, the beginning of wisdom. It makes us very modest, thinking about evil, and perhaps less judgmental when we are confronted with crime and with violence. You know, we always have the tendency to put it outside us. This is not something that belongs to me. It might become an eye-opener if we think of crime and violence as a possibility that is in each human being, be it unconscious. The first individual who recognized this was the famous Johann von Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who belongs to one of the important persons at the beginning of this age of consciousness, of the consciousness soul. It is told that once a famous medical doctor, Lavater, who developed a whole way of finding how through the physiognomy and especially through the skull, one can read something from one's character, an art that was developed at that time and which doesn't work all the time, by the way. In any case, Lavater took the skull of Goethe and tried to find what are your qualities, and suddenly he put his hands off and he was shocked. And Goethe asked, "What's the matter?" "Well," said Lavater, "I recognize something that usually belongs to criminals in the form of your skull." And Goethe, as an answer, said, "Yes, I am aware of these possibilities. In me, there is something of a criminal. I am able to commit all crimes, and only through conscious confrontation, I can work with this faculty. So here we are already building the bridge from how to know evil to how to confront evil. And as said, this knowledge is needed. No, more is needed for a confrontation. I need more than knowledge. I even need more than wisdom for a true confrontation. Laura, can you show us the two pictures of Hannes? One of them, we began with it last time, and I added another one. Hannes, a contemporary Dutch artist, made this artwork with the title Confrontation. And last time, 2 weeks ago, someone asked, can you say somewhat more about it? Well, the image is vague, but at least it shows two opposites, two dark opposites, with a giant and colorful field between them. In order to make it somewhat more clear, I added an earlier painting of Hannes that she made in 1995 with the same title, Confrontation. And whereas the first painting is more abstract, this one is more figurative, where you see one person with a kind of shield before her, another person kind of withdrawn at the other side of the image, a kind of attack. And of course, in a confrontation, we often think in terms of attack, offensive, defensive, and so on. A clash between opposites. I think that's clear in this painting. In our first session, I came to the conclusion, in order to meet evil and to work with evil, we need the one who stands in the middle. Laura, can you once more show this image that Rudolf Steiner made of the one who is in fact the middle of this whole drama of evil? The sculpture that is called the representative of the human being. Again, we won't go into all the details of these two counter forces. We will meet them once more in the story today, but one of them is above the figure in the middle, Lucifer. One is below, Ahriman. And the whole of this statue of this representative shows that he creates a balance between the two. I summed it up with one expression of Rudolf Steiner, who once said, in searching for balance, the Christ can be found. It's such a wonderful way of putting it. It's not in balance is Christ, because in fact, as human beings, we are hardly ever in complete balance, but the human being has this necessity and this quality of constantly balancing out, trying to balance out, to find a middle between the extremes. Now, in order to understand confrontation with evil, we will step into, one could say, an archetype of a healthy confrontation with evil, the famous struggle, the fight between Michael and the dragon. When you look at old paintings, icons, you know this image is expressed thousandfold, where you see Michael in his confrontation with the dragon, you will notice often that there are not just two, Michael and the dragon, but somewhere up in the corner of such an icon, you will find images of the Godhead, who is in the background, so to say, part of this confrontation. That's why I said, for a healthy confrontation, more is needed than knowledge, and even more is needed than wisdom. What the old icons show is expressed in a modern way in the so-called red window, a giant red window that can be found also nowadays in the so-called Goetheanum, the place where Rudolf Steiner had his center of anthroposophy, and where still nowadays the center of anthroposophy is in Switzerland. Laura, can you show us this image? And I hope it is clear enough in its vagueness to show a very interesting detail, namely this same fight between Michael and the dragon. There's a lot to see on this image, which is made in a thick red glass window. We will focus on the bottom of this image, where you can see, sorry, it's vague, at the right side, at the bottom of this red window, a giant head of a dragon, dark. Left to him is more or less in a negative form, that means very light, the image of Michael. So you see a giant dark head of the dragon, just the head, and left of him, Michael. At the right side of Michael, you can still see his wing, one of his wings. This is in the middle, in the bottom of the image. Yes, there they are. Now, the person who had the task to make this window asked Rudolf Steiner, why does Michael not look at the dragon? You can perhaps imagine, when you follow the figure of Michael, you see the head is above the head of the dragon. So Asya Turgenev, making this image, asked Rudolf Steiner, why doesn't he look at the dragon? And then there came the interesting answer of Rudolf Steiner. If Michael would look at the dragon, he would have to say yes to him. This being of the dragon is extremely more powerful than Michael. One could say it's again this principle, I can't do it on my own in the confrontation with evil. And even in this archetype of what I call a healthy confrontation, Michael can't do it on his own. He has to fight with a being that in the hierarchies stands far above him. Or evil has its origin in the highest hierarchy, the first hierarchy of which the thrones are a part. Michael is just an archangel who steps in the realm of the archai during a certain time, but in fact he's an archangel. So if Michael would fight alone, it would be, sorry for the expression, an impossible job, impossible to fulfill without the Christ. Michael needs the one who stands in the middle in order to put the dragon at the place where he belongs, eventually on the earth. Now we will use this archetype for human confrontations with evil. And in order to show again, also to make visible what we need for human confrontations, I chose an image of the so-called Isenheimer altar, a painting made by Matthias Grunewald. And I will show you only one part of it, of the many, many parts of this very complex altar painting. It is called the confrontation of Saint Anthony with the demons. Here again, you can see that in a real confrontation with evil, we need more than knowledge, more than wisdom, even more than this divine being, Sophia. In order to understand what happens here, we need a part of the so-called Golden Legend. That's a series of legends that were written in the Middle Ages. And one of them tells about this episode in the life of Saint Anthony, the saint. It tells that Saint Anthony lives in the desert, quite alone, as a hermit. And one day, during his prayers, he is attacked by a legion of demons. They come from all sides, terrible faces, not just animals, but beasts, with horns, with claws. And Anthony, the storyteller, is kind of torn apart by these demons, by their teeth, their claws. He isn't able to stand up, he falls down, he's overwhelmed by evil, and at the very last moment, when he nearly loses his consciousness, the Christ appears. You can see this presence of the Christ in the higher part of the artwork. So in this golden, yellow, reddish middle, Christ appears, and the demons flee away. And then Anthony asks, "Good Lord, where were you when I had to fight?" And Jesus answers, "Anthony, I was there all the time, but I wanted to see your strength, your courage, your struggle. Yeah. So again, here we have a wonderful expression of these two worlds working together in the confrontation with evil. It's not just me. It's not just, well, let Christ do the work, but we too, the two of us, we can do the work. And in order to uh, confront evil, we need both of these faculties. One could say the courage to fight and the humility, the modesty. I can't do it on my own. In the book references and article references, I mentioned one of the letters of St. Paul, the letter to the Ephesians in the 6th chapter, which in fact says, wait a moment, I'll say it in my own words. When I fight with my neighbor, it's not my neighbor. It's not my brother, my boss, my spouse, or whatever with whom I have a confrontation. In fact, I have to look through my brother, through my neighbor, and recognize the being that wants to enter a confrontation, the being of evil. And here's the literal expression that Paul uses. And here is already an expression of part of the question of last time, which tools, which weapons can we develop in the confrontation with evil? Paul writes, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We would say we wrestle not with our neighbor, our brother, our boss, but against, and now I'll use his own original words, arkas, exousiais, kospokratos tou skotus. Archas, usually translated as principalities, but these are the archai, a certain hierarchy of spiritual beings. That's the world with which we in fact wrestle. We wrestle with exousiais. That's another expression for a higher rank of the hierarchies, of the fallen angels, of the kosmokratos tous kotus, the rulers of the darkness. We struggle with the pneumatica tes poneros and tois ep uranios. We fight with the spirits of evil in the heavens. So again, Paul makes clear, when you have a confrontation, and when this confrontation evokes a form of evil, it's not the human being, it's the being of evil itself, evil himself, so to say, who steps in. And then again, he makes clear in this letter to the Ephesians, you can't do it on your own. Don't fight on your own. You need the, and here's a very interesting expression in his language, you need the panoplia tou theou, you need the whole armor of God. You need a tool, a weapon that will be given to you by God himself. And then afterwards, he describes all the moral qualities that, so to say, cover us up from top to toe in order to receive this panoplia tou theou, this whole armor of God. which is built from moral faculties that then make us able to confront evil in a healthy way. I will give an own experience in confronting evil, and in fact, it is given as part of an answer to a very interesting and challenging question. And I think the question is not just from this one person who put it in words, but many of you will recognize it. Someone wrote after the first webinar, I am struggling with how to address dream state assaults from evil, how to best prepare and maintain a certain degree of consciousness. I guess many of you will have this experience that evil is not just there during the day, but it can overcome you in the middle of the night, of a sleep, of a dream. Yeah. Again, here we struggle with the problem of something that is unconscious. When unconsciousness steps up, evil has a chance to step in. And the question was how to address dream state assaults from evil. Now let me tell you my own and strongest experience with evil. Although I hesitate a little bit to bring it in such a webinar, for me it is one of my most essential experiences at all in life. Several years ago, during vacation in the mountains, one day I climbed up on the top of a mountain. It was a whole day of climbing, and before I went up, I saw on the map that on the top of the mountain there was a hotel where I could stay overnight. What I didn't see was that at the other side of the mountain there was a gondola. Yeah, there was a gondola coming up, and it brought dozens and dozens of tourists in the same hotel. So here I went on my own, a whole day of hiking, steep up, and on the other side they came with dozens. And while I came at the hotel very exhausted, these tourists had all the energy still, and in the evening I was lying on the first floor. I heard below me the sounds of people chatting, drinking, getting drunk, singing, shouting, and I heard, somewhat already in a half-dream state, that these were not just the sounds of people, but something else, something inhuman, stepped in this shouting and singing. And then I fell asleep. The unconsciousness took over. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. Something hit my neck from the back. I felt it physically. It was pitch dark around me. There was a terrible atmosphere, and evil was all around me. Not just something left over of these drunken people, but this being of evil was there. It was so omnipresent that I think never in my life I prayed so intensive in order to overcome this omnipresence of evil. And suddenly, out of the dark, the imagination of the representative of the human being came up. It was not just a picture, it was the imagination of a living being. I saw him in the shape that Rudolf Steiner gave to him, in this case surrounded by wings, thousands of wings of angels. And then another image, another imagination came out of the darkness. I saw the imagination of Michael. He spoke not a word, but he made a gesture. He made a gesture that showed, put this evil under you. And at the same time, with this gesture, I received the power to take in, so to say, all the darkness that was there in the atmosphere and to put it under my feet. And then the atmosphere of the room was clear again. It was completely silent. I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up with sunrise, a beautiful day. There was no trace left of all the darkness that was there in the evening and the night. I was full of gratitude for what happened to me. I was free from all forms of anxiety. And while the drunk people were still asleep, I went down the mountain and had one of the best days in my life. While perhaps the other people woke up in the course of the day with each with a nail in their head after drunkenness. Of course, this is not something like redemption of evil. We are not yet there, third session, but it shows we need a little help from our heavenly friends. And again, this experience showed me when I have a confrontation with someone, it's not about him and me. It's not just about him or her and me. Or when there is something bad, like let's say drunkenness, I have the tendency to focus, so to say, on this event of drunkenness, or I have the tendency to focus on the person who seems to be evil. I have to look further, however, to the demons that try to step in, and I even have to look further than the demons. I have to look above evil to the forces that give us the power to put evil at the place where it belongs. In this realm that Rudolf Steiner called subconscious life. There is no crime in the world to which each human being has not a tendency in his subconscious life. So don't fight on your own, just with your own weapons. It's not just my fight, my enemy, my armor. Each time that we have a confrontation with evil, we are part of a bigger fight. Rudolf Steiner, in one of his lectures, even mentions that in the human being itself, even in our constitution. There is a kind of miniature of this fight of Michael and the dragon. Our confrontation with evil can be and has to be a miniature of this bigger fight. Now, I want to make the theme somewhat more concrete by introducing to you the work of a master in confrontation, a master in healthy confrontation. You will find excellent tools for confrontation in the work of a professor who works in Austria. His name is Friedrich Glasel. Laura, I think I put a photo of the cover of his book. Yes, here it is. The name of the author is not on the picture, Friedrich Glasel. He's a famous man in working with conflict. The title in English is Confronting Conflict, a first aid kit for handling conflict. The original title of the book is, very interesting title, Konfliktfähigkeit statt Streitlust. I could translate it like the art of working with conflicts instead of aggressiveness. So the author does not say, please try to avoid all conflicts. That's not healthy. A conflict can be very healthy and very necessary. But it's about the art of working with conflicts instead of aggressiveness. And you see a remarkable cartoon on the cover. Two people who are caught in the tail of the dragon. The dragon is very satisfied with the two of them, and they ask themselves, do we have a conflict, or does the conflict have us? Yeah? Yes, I can have a conflict as long as I'm conscious and aware and try to develop wisdom and so on. Conflict is often a dragon with two fighters in his tail, as Friedrich Glasel puts it. Friedrich Glasel has his own organization called Trigon that works with conflict management, and he does so not only in the personal sphere when two people are in a conflict, but also in bigger forms like conflicts between organizations, conflicts between countries. He has been involved and worked with several organizations and countries. And this book, and by the way, he has a whole series of books about this theme, shows how we can stay healthy in a conflict instead of the usual reactions, which many of you will know. Usually in a conflict, it's fight or flight. Yeah? Either we begin to hit or we run away. No, there's a third form of being in a conflict that is to stand, to be able to show yourself as you are, and at the same time to receive the other as he is at that moment, to take him as he is. By the way, I come back for a moment to Paul and his letter to the Ephesians. Also in the letter to the Ephesians, when Paul speaks about conflict, uh, and speaks about the armor of God that we need in our confrontation with these giant beings of the hierarchies. He writes, "Stand, therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, and receive the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." So here are these remarkable wordings. He does not say, now fight. He doesn't say, now run away. No, stand. And this word stand in front of the evil in the confrontation comes back again and again. And then it says, you need something of the gods in order to stand. Receive the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, the shield of faith. Remember this first painting that we had in the beginning of Hannes, the two people, one with the shield. But don't use just your own shield. My experience, by the way, is that in meditating this letter, in the meantime, I know it by heart, at least in the Dutch language. Meditating on this letter of the Ephesians, I developed the best preparation for a confrontation. So let's say when I have to mediate between people, which is always a challenging task, before I go into a meditation, before I go in a mediation, I meditate this letter and I build up this whole imagination of the armor of God. Now, with the short time left, don't forget the confrontation with yourself, the most difficult and often painful encounter. Evil is not just all around me, but it's in me. And it has even a certain name. In the 18th and 19th century, this name came up suddenly out of the blue, the doppelganger. Interesting, in the age of the consciousness soul, people suddenly started to become aware of a being, a dark being, that goes together with us all the time. Dostoevsky wrote his book, The Double. There's in the English literature, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and so on. There's a whole series of artworks, also in music, that suddenly show we have someone who accompanies us, our dark twin brother. By the way, that's an expression that a friend of mine used when he was on his deathbed. One morning he said, "This night I saw my dark twin brother, but that's very difficult to meet him." And a few hours later he died. It is well known that just before death, this double, this shadow, leaves the body, and experienced nurses can tell when someone shortly before his death suddenly becomes very lucid, very seemingly healthy, often relative thinks she's getting better, she's getting better. But in fact, experienced nurses know this will be a sign of the double that leaves the body and the person can die. In psychology, it's called the shadow, and one of the expressions, one of the wordings for the shadow is suppressed characteristics that are not admitted by a person. Again, we are here in the realm of what Rudolf Steiner called our subconscious life. We have to get to know our dark twin brother. We have to dare to look in our own dark mirror. We have to get to know our blind spots. One of the methods to get to know the double is the review of the day. And as a friend of mine, a psychiatrist with whom I worked to get to know myself in my own biography, put it, he said, don't just look at what you did during the day. Ask yourself, where was Lucifer today? Where did Ahriman try to step in? Get to know your own zoo, one could say. Your own part that is unconscious and that wants to break away and to make a chaos out of everything. When I was in Australia a few years ago and had a talk about the double, one of the Australians said, "We have a nice wording for it. We say, when you are in the zoo, don't feed the animals." That means when you are in the zoo of your own wild feelings, emotions, and so on, don't feed these feelings. And that brings us already in the neighborhood to our third webinar, where we begin with the expression that Ita Weekman used: don't feed the demons, starve them. But now, Laura, and those who attend the webinar, we still have a few minutes left to see if there are any questions or remarks that want to be said.
Wow, thank you so much. I was so moved so many times throughout this, our time together here. I mean, definitely felt a little teary at times, and I'm really thankful for you sharing your personal story as well. So yeah, I'd like to open it up to questions. I see one already, and we just have very little time, but if you can stay for a few minutes extra, that's fine. And then after that, you can feel free to email me the questions and I'll pass them along to you, Bastiaan. Thank you so much. Okay, so here's the question. Can you speak more on our need to be witnessed by Christ in our work and struggle? Is there more written on this by Steiner or others? I think when you were talking about St. Anthony, you know, like I'm here, I was just watching to see your strength. Could you say a little bit more about that? Yeah.
First of all, I would say, and this is not just my wording, the whole of anthroposophy is about Christ. Or to put it more abstract, anthroposophy is Christ-centered, Christology. But here I remember an expression that Rudolf Steiner used, and that makes it more personal and more present. And how does he say it? The best way I can express what is happening is the spiritual world is there. Christ is there all the time. We need faculties, we need organs to not just understand, but to develop a sense. We develop a sense organ for the presence of Christ. And there are wonderful lectures about wonder, compassion, and conscience. I will put the reference in the list of references. There are a few wonderful lectures about these three: wonder, compassion, and conscience, that show that these are the human organs with which we can perceive the presence of Christ. Instead of judging, instead of just reasoning, develop a sense of wonder for everything that happens, even wonder for evil. Yeah? And through this wonder, we begin to sense something of the presence of Christ, and we help him to become present. Through our compassion, not just rejecting evil, but compassion with evil, with the one who is a criminal, for example, we are able to move in the realm in which Christ is, who has to accompany each individual. Yeah? So I would strongly recommend these lectures: wonder, compassion, conscience. And as said, I will put them in the list of references. Next time, the third session, we will go into the theme of redemption of evil. And there we will be able, more or less, to go into these realms. Compassion with evil. Keep this as a thread, so to say, between today and the next meeting in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. So we have more questions, but because we're over time now, and it's definitely a different time where you are. I think it's probably 7 p.m., right? Yes, we will move on. And I am trying to capture them, some of the questions, but if you want to email them to me, that would be the best thing to do. It's laura@anthroposophy.org. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Bastiaan, so much. I really feel like you took us on a journey, and I have like a whole page full of notes. Thank you so much for your help, and really for your help. I'm thinking of how to apply all this, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Bastiaan. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.